So I think about the email that I received this week and thinking about our Boy Scouts and all of the wonderful ambitions that we have as we think about our children and how we would like for them to grow up. But in this particular email, the way things would have had it, the young man had reached a certain age in adolescence, and the parents were just wondering what kinds of ambitions their son was having about growing up. So the father said, well, I have a test. So the father had 3 items. There was a $10 bill, there was a Bible, and believe it or not, there was just a small bottle of whiskey. And he put them out, and then he hid, and he watched. And he said, I wonder which one he'll choose. And he said to his wife, if he chooses the Bible, he's going to be a preacher. If he chooses the $10 bill, he's going to be a business person. And she says, well, what about the whiskey? Let's not think about that. Sure enough, the young man comes back into the room and he notices all 3 items on the table. He looks at the Bible and he puts it in his pocket. And the father says, wonderful. He's going to be a preacher. But then he takes the $10 bill. He puts that in his pocket. And the father says, a preacher, but also a businessman. And lo and behold, lastly, he grabs that small bottle of whiskey. And the father says, oh my goodness, it's worse than I thought. And his wife says, what's wrong? I think he's going to be a politician. I wonder what kind of key is the golden rule? What kind of doors does it open? The Gospel of Matthew, it is a reminder that throughout human history, every generation has sought to identify the right key to unlock the potentials and the promises of a full life. The disciples followed Jesus because they believed the teachings of Jesus were the right key or the right answer to life's eternal questions that for many, neither the law nor the prophets seemed to sufficiently be understood. Thus, the parables of the splinters within each other's eyes, meaning the moral vision of each person can be impaired. The parable of pearls cast in the presence of wild animals, even those that were deemed to be culturally unclean. And as Jesus would say, casting them often meant inviting retribution. Jesus understood this. He would know. He had cast his net wide, and he had loved deeply. And yet, he would still be taken to a cross outside of the city of Jerusalem. For our scouts who are here this morning, I want to ask the question, what do Alex Ovechkin and Bryce Harper have in common? Since you have not answered the question, I will simply share with you. Both of them have keys to the city of the District of Columbia. That's what Jesus invited the people who would listen to his Sermon on the Mount. He offered them a key to a greater city. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 14, do not judge so that you may not be judged. For with the judgment you make, you will be judged. And the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while a log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, and do not throw your pearls before swine, or they will trample them underfoot and turn and maul you. Ask, and it will be given to you. Search, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened for you. For everyone who asks receives, and everyone who searches finds, and for everyone who knocks, the door will be opened. Is there anyone among you who, if your child asks for bread, will give a stone? Or if a child asks for a fish, will give a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask of him? Thanks be to God. The witness to God's word. There was one other person whose name I didn't mention, and that is the name of James West. James West was a native Washingtonian. He was born in 1882, and shortly after his birth, he lost both of his parents to tuberculosis. As a matter of fact, West himself, in just a few years after his birth, suffered this same disease, which crippled him, leaving him with one leg shorter than the other. But James West had a certain goal in mind. At the orphanage, West learned to sew because he was willing to be led by the girls who were also at the orphanage. West took turns managing the furnace and caring for the chickens. He entered public school, and there he became a voracious reader. West improved the conditions in the library of his orphanage. And after graduating from high school, he entered law school. And while at law school, he edited the newspaper, and he also managed the football team in his community. He acted as a substitute math teacher in the classroom. And after receiving his law degree, West continued to work for the causes of justice for children. As a matter of fact, President Theodore Roosevelt offered him an appointment to work with the Board of Pensions of Appeals in the Department of the Interior. And it was there that West continued to offer legislation that would bring changes in the judicial system, that would make orphanages and homes such as what he grew up in a better residence and place for children. And as he was working and laboring on behalf of children, using the gifts of law that he had received, it was in 1910 that James West was hired temporarily to work with the Boy Scouts. And that temporary position lasted for almost 35 years. James West, perhaps he had an understanding, a sense of the hymn that we will sing in just a few moments. A hymn that speaks about having something in common with what Jesus Christ shared with the disciples and the crowds who listened to him as he gave his Sermon on the Mount. As each far horizon beckons, may it challenge us anew. Children of creative purpose, serving others and honoring you. May our dreams prove rich with promise each endeavor well begun. Great Creator, give us guidance till our goals and yours are one. The practice of giving the key to the city to celebrated individuals, trusted friends. It was a part of what was recognized in medieval history. Many of the cities were walled fortresses, and they were guarded all during the day, and certainly at night the doors were locked. But when a city was able to celebrate a trusted friend, they made a great ceremony of it. The key to the doorway to the city was presented. And this individual was recognized as one who had the freedom to travel in and out of that city as long as that person was able. Jesus Christ, in his parable on the Mount, he spoke about societies seemingly incapable of giving good gifts, yet understanding how to act in moral ways, loving our children, responding to their needs. How much more does our loving God care for you and I? In terms of scouting, the words might read, one good turn after another. Jesus' golden rule gives us a standard by which naturally selfish people can gauge their actions and actively learn how to live in community, how to treat others the way that they themselves would like to be treated. Jesus Christ offered the words of how to live in community, how to live in opposing ways to individualism and materialism. That was a part of the message that Jesus shared of how to do it in community. Jesus said, treating one another as one would like to be treated. The foundational principles of both the law and the prophets are in this. And as I've read that particular text, I've thought about the prophets. Not necessarily Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel, not even Amos. The prophet and the laws, when I think about the golden rule, I think about the prophet, or at least the propheticness of Esther, a woman in the Bible. A woman who, along with her uncle Mordecai, were able to challenge an unjust system and an unjust person who was supposed to work with the king and the king's people. And yet Haman was determined to destroy the Jewish people. And in the story of Esther, there was a moment in that story when the king was not able to sleep at night. And the king asked of his secretary, bring me the book of daily records and then read them to me. The reason the king was restless is because his life had been threatened. And that one individual brought it to his attention, and his life was saved. And that individual was none other than Mordecai. Mordecai, when the secretary read the records to him, the king's servant said, the king asked, well, what has been done to repay this person, Mordecai, for what he has done for me? And the secretary, in reading it, he said, well, king, actually, nothing. And so the king said, who's out in the courtyard? And the secretary said, it's basically your lieutenant, it's Haman. He says, well, have Haman to come in to me. And in so doing, remember Mordecai, he had already plotted by having a gallows created because it was his intention to destroy every Jewish person. So when the king had Haman brought into his presence, the king said to Haman, what shall I do for the person whom I wish to honor? But Haman, in all of his arrogance and all of his pride, thought the king was about to honor him. And so Haman said to the king, for a person whom the king wishes to honor, let the king's servants bring out the fine linen robe that the king has worn, and the horse on which the king rides, and let both be given to one of the king's honored friends. And let him robe the person whom the king loves and mount him on the horse, and let it be proclaimed through the open square of the city, saying, thus it shall be done for everyone whom the king honors. In other words, it's as if he's to receive the keys of the city. And so the king says to Haman, you have made an excellent suggestion. Now go and do this for Mordecai. And Haman was distraught. But the message, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Haman sought to destroy a certain people. Mordecai was aware of it. But rather than try to go out and to correct something that he knew was wrong, to go out and to create havoc and saying, this person, Haman, he's evil and we got to fight against him. And Mordecai, yes, he told Esther, but more so, Mordecai told God. And God corrected that which was wrong. And that's how we have to be willing to be witnesses in the world. That when we believe that the church and God's people have been judged without mercy, judged incorrectly, we have to be willing to allow how we love to speak more greatly for us than to go out and to try to simply do our own kind of publicity. W.E.B. Boyce and Lieutenant General Baden-Powell, they agreed that the golden rule is to turn the eyes of the soul outward as well as inward. That young, and at the time, men, must cultivate the habit of looking outward and thinking about the rights of others. Both Boyce and Baden-Powell, they spoke about a time in their lives when they were boys, when they were young men, and how the older boys would put them in a line, and after having them in a line, they would then take coins, quarters and coins, and just throw them on the floor. And all of a sudden, the boys who were in that line, they would just go to the floor. And they said that in doing that, the floor was covered with a squirming, squealing, kicking mass of boyhood. And when everything was over, some of the boys were crying and the others were fighting. And community had been violently altered. The source of that trouble was that every boy was thinking of only two things. Each person was thinking of the coin and how to get what he desired. Nobody was thinking about the other person. And so often the world seems to be much like these boys on the floor, squirming, shouting, kicking, gouging society's people. All in all, sold out to the pursuit of life's prizes for themselves, with little or no thought for the circumstances of the other person. The golden rule is the key that unlocks the potential for every vibrant community living and practicing equity. In every community woven together by a covenant, the golden rule is the key unlocking the door to a community's God-given potential and promise to live and to love according to the divinely driven purpose of service and God's salvation. For our scouts, perhaps one thing to do as community is to remember the person of James West, who offered the addition to your third oath to help other people at all times, to keep oneself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. That was the key. Perhaps posthumously, some of you as troop members might write a letter to your congressperson asking that the first Chief Scout Executive could receive a key to his native city, the District of Columbia. And I've preached long enough, but if you would help engage me just a moment longer, if you think that these just might be helpful keys, the meaning of the golden rule, I would ask for you to just give it back to me. Yes, that's the right key. As Jesus Christ has loved us, we should love others. We should resist judging others simply by appearances and remember the wisdom that many a true heart beats beneath a tattered coat.
Yes, that's right key.
Good manners are always to be applied at all times and not just sometimes.
Yes, that's the right key.
Bravery and courage are golden characteristics. They teach us to live with integrity, lead with conviction, and not to ever swerve from the truth.
Yes, that's the right key.
Love endures and is kind.
Yes, that's the right key.
Love never fails.
Yes, that's the right key.
The more we love, the more we share love, the more God gives us love. We all know it, but God needs for us to show it.
Yes, that's the right key.
Amen.